Welcome to the show, Dr. Doni Wilson, honey. How are you doing? It has been so long, girl. What's up with you?
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad to be talking with you. Thank you so much for having me here.
Well, we are celebrating your book, and we're talking about really the importance of this book right now, especially post pandemic, post everything that's gone down. I would say that so many of us are unconsciously and maybe even consciously just feeling burned out. And, I say unconsciously because so often it's just the status quo, like we've normalized burnout for so many people. And so, what we're going to be talking about today is how is it that burnout has become so perpetual for so many people? And then, once we can identify what that is, what are the first steps that we need to take to start healing our body? Because you and I both know that burnout is like like the silent killer. You know what I'm saying? That leads to so many other chronic conditions down the road. So before we get into all that, I know it's a lot to unpack. Ever since I've known you, this is the work you've been doing in the world. And I know we've connected so often because I love this work too, because I've been there. So talk to me about kind of that defining moment where you were just like, this is a problem that we have got to solve for people because it is such an epidemic.
Oh my gosh. Well, when I first graduated from naturopathic medical school, and I also trained as a midwife. So when I was in naturopathic medical school, I was also on call doing home birth deliveries at night. And then I did a residency. And, it's that same like wanting to do more, wanting to get it done faster. And so I just was doing it all at once. And then I graduated and moved to New York City right after 9/11. So this is November 2001. And I get to New York and I'm like, this is one of the most stressful times in history in the tri-state area specifically. And I was like, what am I going to do? How am I going to get through this? Because I grew up on the West Coast. So I was new to New York and I was new to this situation post 9/11. Now, a year later, I had my daughter, who is now 19 years old. So here I was, a new mom, new doctor in a new location. And I found that I was completely burned out. I finally figured it out. Like you're saying, I think a lot of us function in burnout all the time. And we just keep pushing through because we have to day after day. But one day I finally tested myself, Mariza. I finally did my cortisol and adrenaline levels. And I saw on paper that my levels were so low. And that was the moment when I was like, oh my gosh, I have to deal with this. I can't just ignore this anymore. I have to figure out how to solve this if I'm going to be able to keep going.
No, so true. And I just want to just point out that having low cortisol is after you've had high cortisol, right? We see high cortisol first, which a lot of people will see that on their labs. And then when you have like nothing in the tank cortisol, that is very far down the line, pushing towards, chronic fatigue syndrome, at that point. You may have even been past burnout and heading in that other direction. And how often do you find that when you finally run labs on somebody that they don't even have high cortisol levels anymore, that their cortisol levels are actually starting to tank?
Well, I'm so glad you're mentioning this because a lot of times when we first become aware that we're stressed or burned out, we automatically assume that we have high cortisol. Like if probably we asked everyone listening, if what do you think your cortisol levels are? Most people will guess that it's high because we hear about that most. We hear about being stressed and having high cortisol. And now, after 22 years of measuring thousands of people's cortisol levels, I can tell you that we don't all have high cortisol. Some of us have low cortisol at certain times a day. And what I also recommend doing is measuring adrenaline, because now we have two parameters we can check. We can see what is your cortisol and what is your adrenaline. And it's different for everyone. So we need to really help recover effectively. We need to know where you are to begin with right now. We need to know if you're high or low cortisol and high or low adrenaline.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that because I know everyone's different, but I want to give a general landscape to the conversation as well. In all the years of you've been looking at labs, I know for me, all the years that I've been looking at labs as well, yeah, it can look so topsy turvy, and a lot of things go into consideration. But kind of where would that first stage be? Like on average, what are we normally seeing as indicators?
What I find is that it's going to be different for each person because, and like you were mentioning, there's the standard understanding of maladaptive syndrome, adrenal maladaptive syndrome, what we refer to, where if we look at physiology of a human over time, there's a stress response where cortisol, adrenaline increases, and then over time, the adrenals might get worn out, or what we call adrenal exhaustion or adrenal fatigue, where the levels become low. And the way I started thinking about it is I wanted to know with the person sitting in front of me, where are they right now? Because that's going to be, more indicative for me of, like what their treatment needs to be. Again, because the treatment's different, right? Like if we're going to use different herbs or nutrients or even other stress recovery activities or substances that function better if a person has high cortisol, bring it down, or high adrenaline to bring it down versus low cortisol to bring it back up. So what I want to know is where are you at this moment in time? And it really varies from person to person. This is why in the book, I identify 5 what I call stress types or stress patterns. So we can see where are you at this moment with your adrenal function. And even though, yes, there's what we could look at physiologically over time, what matters most clinically and for health improvement is where are you at this moment?
Okay. And so are you finding, Dr. Doni Wilson, that it is always adrenal insufficiency? Is it ever a cellular insufficiency? Because that's often what I found too, is that there was a protective mechanism. Like if you keep crying wolf, if the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis keeps firing off stranger danger signals all the time because the amygdala is all messed up due to previous childhood traumas, or the way that you perceive specific situations, or that you are a rushing woman running from one thing to another because you've got fierce mama energy, or a combination of all of those things, let's be honest, right?
Yes.
You're constantly firing off to the adrenals. I get that, our catecholamines that are like, hey, it's an emergency. What, 50 times a day? What do you think?
I know this is the reality that we live in, and I'm so glad you're saying this because you're saying like this is, I think, our normal existence is we do have our past childhood trauma, we have our current drama, and everything in between. And our brain, the amygdala in the brain is this. It's our built-in. I call it our built-in stress radar system. Our brain is constantly going to pick up on stress. And I believe that part of addressing it, and the name of the book is Master Your Stress, because to me, it's not just so much managing it, is we need to master it. And to master anything, we need to understand it, become aware of it, understand how it affects us and what we can do about it. And so it's about understanding this stress radar system is going to be picking up on so many signals, right? Like sounds, change in temperature, change in light and darkness. There's so many things our nervous system's constantly picking up on. And so, yes, that's definitely part of it. It's not just what's happening in the adrenals and cortisol and adrenaline. It's also what happens with the vagus nerve, for example, right?
Yeah. Or in your mitochondria. I look at all of this when I've talked so much in at length, and I'm so excited about your book of like, at the end of the day, the brain is overfiring. The brain is trying to protect you. The brain doesn't feel safe. You've got SOS signals. I call it the stranger danger, like stranger danger, like you better run. And over something that another person would be like, what's the problem? What's going on here? And, we send the message to the adrenals. The adrenals are like, okay, fine. They send out the messages to everyone else. And what a lot of people don't realize is that cortisol and adrenaline are tear you down hormones, because you can't keep running at that. You can't keep running from the tiger, which is what your body physiologically feels. And so I always thought it was a combination of one, your adrenals are getting the beat down because they are the messenger that has to relay the next message to all the rest of the cells. But then the other part of it, I always thought, was the cells themselves who are like, okay, enough is enough. I've got way too much cortisol banging at my door, kind of like insulin, kind of insulin, too much insulin banging at the door. And cortisol is a driver of insulin, by the way. If you always talk about how your body can respond to like eating a cupcake, but you didn't eat a cupcake. You're just responding to a trauma that you had from back in the day. So then your cells are like, you know what? I don't need all this emergency energy. I can't handle all this emergency energy. I don't even have the nutrients inside of myself. I've burned through all of the magnesium and the B vitamins and all the things in my mitochondria. I call them the divas of the cell. Like they're just like, we can't take it. We can't take it anymore. And that's, I always have felt like that's what really led to like the end result, chronic fatigue of it's at a cellular level, the cells just can't take it anymore. And so I don't know if you speak into both what happens the adrenals, but then also what happens on at the cell level of like, just enough is enough. I can't do this.
Absolutely. Yes, I do. I don't hesitate to go into this in the book. I really believe that when we understand those diva mitochondria, how important they are and how much they're affected by stress. Ultimately, if our mitochondria are struggling and overwhelmed by oxidative stress, right? This external stress turns into oxidative stress in our cells. And then the mitochondria, we need them to make energy for us. So like you said, this is why chronic fatigue is associated. How are we going to have energy to do anything if our mitochondria are completely overwhelmed by stress and oxidative stress? And these mitochondria are running the show ultimately inside of all of our cells throughout our body and our brain. So they are so important. And to understand that there's something we can do to help them. Like I think sometimes when we've been under so much stress and we feel awful, right? We're exhausted, we're anxious, we can't sleep, our digestion's off, everything is off. And right when we're feeling our worst, we're supposed to now figure out how to recover. And it can feel so unfair. But I think that if by understanding like, okay, these, they can also heal. Our mitochondria can heal when we give them the right nutrients, we move that oxidative stress and we start making changes in our day-to-day life, we can actually help them recover and get the nutrients back and get things functioning again. But I love how you say that, like the mitochondria are so affected by these other hormones, cortisol, insulin. And then the other factor that to throw into the mix is the imbalance of neurotransmitters that occurs, because these neurotransmitters like serotonin and GABA and dopamine, they have to do not only with our energy, but our mood and our focus and our sleep, and they get affected by stress. So as soon as like our serotonin is low or our GABA is low or the dopamine's high or low, now that's scrambling the signal more. So no wonder we can feel so awful.
So as I know, as everyone's listening and as we're both talking, they're like, okay, this sounds like a multiple pronged situation here. And I don't even, where do we even start with it? And I know that not everyone, unfortunately, is able to get full testing, although I do feel it's so critical to know. And then also, it's one thing to hopefully balance out adrenaline and cortisol, but also then we've got these other things that we've caused problems, which are equally as critical. And so Doni, honey, when you've been taking care of thousands of patients, where do you start knowing that someone has got, a brain is receiving the crazy signals, it doesn't know how to receive safety signals anymore. And so it's just a firing of information that's freaking the body out. And I know that our hormones are literally just responding to that information, that perceived information. Then they're going and doing their thing, which is lighting up so many other parts of the body as well. Because as we mentioned, these are critical hormones. These are survival hormones. You don't need reproduction if you can't survive. You don't need gut function if you can't survive. There's a lot of things we can put to the wayside for survival first and foremost, whether you're really truly in a survival mode state or not.
I love that you're saying that, because in the book I talk about it as survival mode or stress mode. When we literally get stuck in stress mode, it's like the sometimes then we don't even realize we're stuck in stress or survival mode because it's so normal. It just feels like, well, this is just how it is. And we don't know how to get out of it. So it's just, that's your existence. So even to be able to take a step back and say, is it even possible to get out of stress mode? And my question became, how do I stay out of stress mode while still living my life and my passion, while still, right, still being a parent, by still working or running a business, for still having relationships? How do we do the things we love to do and still have stress exposure, but not have to be constantly in that stress mode? And so this is exactly, I love you're asking me, like, how do you do that? And this is the question I asked when I started developing this protocol that I share in the book. And to me, yes, there's things you can do in general, right, that might help everybody, things that probably everyone hears about anyway, right? Meditation or deep breathing, or, there's things that generally we know, okay, I should do that because it's probably good for my stress level. But I wanted to take it another step further to be more effective. I don't want to just get you partway there. I want you to get all the way there to mastering stress and being resilient to stress. And so what I did is I developed a assessment that's in the book. So you don't, without having to pay for a test, in the book, you can do an assessment that helps guide you through, what is your stress type? Are you the stress magnet type based on your symptoms and what's going on in your body? Or are you the blonde blue, for example? Because then you can more closely determine what your treatment should be. Even from diet, we can make dietary changes. We can make sure you're getting enough sleep. We can make sure you're getting stress recovery activities and exercise. But my argument is those things need to be fine-tuned based on your stress pattern, your specific stress pattern. So we're going to make slightly different emphasis of diet or sleep or exercise or stress recovery based on your situation, your unique situation, because that's going to make you more successful at becoming resilient to stress.
And in the 5 archetypes that you have for stress, is there one that you find, or a couple that you find are more prevalent? I'm just curious.
I would say the 2 most common are the stress magnet and the blonde blue. Stress magnet is going to be high cortisol, high adrenaline, at least at some point during the day. And the blonde blue is the low cortisol, low adrenaline. So those are the 2 opposites of each other. But I have to say, the night owl, which is when the cortisol and adrenaline is high in the evening, is actually, right, that I fall in that category. Often my cortisol will go up at night. And there's also the combination ones where you might have high cortisol, low adrenaline, or low cortisol, high adrenaline. And those are also, those are also common patterns. Like I'm always so curious when I get when I can actually measure it and test it. It's pretty equal. I might even say it's close to 20% of each category. You just really want to get a better sense of it. And my hope is that going forward in the future, that more and more research is based on these patterns, because I really feel like it's so essential when, say, we research exercise, for example, if we just do, or meditation, if we just do a general study and the study says meditation is good at bringing your cortisol down. Well, what about for people who already have low cortisol? How is meditation for them? And so I really think we need to require or ask of research to be more specific to these stress patterns so that we can even be more specific about our stress recovery. But what I did is I went through all the research and found any information that already exists that helps us fine tune it, like to say, okay, if I'm going to be eating clean, but what do I need to do with my eating clean based on my pattern?
There's so much to unpack right there. I was thinking about, and we can get in the type of testing that you recommend, and I've looked, I'm just going to put myself, on the ledge or become a little bit vulnerable. My whole life, from when as far as I can remember, I just operated, I thought was just high achiever mode. Like I thought I just was like, the standard is the standard, and how you do one thing is how you do everything. And the standard was always really high. and I would run and 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 run, kind of like how you were talking about, like, why not do 2 programs at the same time? I mean, let's knock these suckers out, right?
Yeah.
And then, and then the result of it is that our bodies are just not meant to do that, not at that level. Like and everyone has their own resilience. And I think a lot of that has an interplay with how you were brought up, what you endured as a child. All of these things come into play. And I've been measuring my cortisol levels, Doni, for many, many years.
I love it. Let's learn from you.
And I'll tell you what, girl, I've never fully recovered. I haven't. It's always just been, it's consistently low at every turn. I think the only time cortisol is like in its magic spot is around noon or 2 o'clock. That's maybe it's noon. And then it just starts to go downhill. And so it's naturally my natural tendency, and this has been for years, and I've improved upon it. And what I know to be true is I have a lot of modalities that I use. I do meditation, I do deep breath, I take walks, I work out every day. I take a lot of supplements. Yeah, I eat a lot of healthy food. Like I do the work around myself, but I know that I have a lot of trauma as a child, a lot. And that unbeknownst to me at times, unconsciously, it is still a driver of how I am as a person in the world. And sometimes it gets really, it lights back up. It's been, now that I'm a new mama, it's kind of come back a little bit more. Like my Alex is like, oh my God, you're now you, but you're you as a mom. Like all of a sudden I thought you healed a lot of your stuff, and now it's coming back again. Like all of a sudden you're super fierce, and it's a little intense. And I'm finding myself back in these, what I call these neurological grooves, right? Where I'm stuck. And again, I've got all these little bumper things around me that help me. But at the end of the day, lab after lab after lab after lab, we're seeing the same thing. And like I said, when I'm really good about like locking it up, I'm not so rushy, I'm not so handling business like a fierce mama. Things get a little bit better. But I'm curious, like even knowing the different types, even knowing that my levels haven't really I've changed them a little bit, and I do all these things to do it. But I know that the deeper driving work is this deeper trauma work. And so I'm curious, one, do you go into this a little bit in the book? And two, when we get to the core root of it, because right, cortisol and adrenaline is a physiological response based on my BS from back in the day. And so until I handle that mess, it is messy. Is it ever going to get better? You know what I'm saying?
I love this question. Thank you so much for digging into this. I really appreciate it. And this is exactly why I wrote the book, because I also felt like I'm doing the stuff, right? Like I'm doing that. I'm taking an adrenal products. I'm doing my, I'm getting a massage, or I'm doing my meditation. We can do the stuff. And I think a lot of people feel that way too. Like I'm taking pretty good care of myself, but it keeps showing up. And you're pointing out that it's when we go through transitions, like maybe it's a hormone change, or, a new thing in your life, a baby, or maybe it's when people move, or when they go through menopause, or when they, some other little shift happens, it can re-trigger our these old stress patterns. And it's very true. I go through, I have a whole chapter about what are the ways that stress showed up for us, because ultimately, our health, the way we feel, our energy, mood, focus, sleep, how we feel in our bodies is determined to some degree by our genetics. Like, we know that's a small percentage of it now. We used to think genetics was a big piece, but now we know it's less than 20%. The majority of what we experience in our life and our health is based on what's usually called environment. I refer to that as our stress, our past stress, our current stress. And we do, as you're kind of alluding to, we have these patterns in our nervous system. And this is where this concept of neuroplasticity comes in, where we know that we can rewrite some of those programs. We can rewrite some of those pathways, or it can feel like you're in a rut, right? Like as soon as a stress trigger comes in, you end up right on that same stress trigger again. And you're like, how did I get on this road again? I'm trying to be on that other road. And you can try different things. And I do cover this in the book, everything from different kinds of therapy that people try to shift these. How do we process these emotions from our past? And I've been through a lot of this myself, whether EMDR therapy, somatic therapy, you name it, kind of, how do we actually shift this experience in our nervous system? And I have to say, for myself, one of the biggest things that made a difference for me was when and it's hard to say because I've done so many different things over the years trying to solve this for myself.
Yeah.
Well, in the past year, what I did is I started working with a shaman, and I don't know how much you want me to share about this, but I'm happy to, is I went to Peru and worked with psychedelic therapy. And one of the first times in my life, Mariza, was when I was like, wow, like this really has, beyond the therapy and all the different approaches, this really for me was touching at a deeper level of rewriting some of these stress patterns for myself, and I see for other people too. And so it just opened my mind to the fact that, again, it's possible to rewrite these programs. And maybe psychedelic therapy isn't right for everyone, but if you've already tried a lot of things and you're feeling like, I'm wanting to really get to the bottom of this and shift it, that might be an option that I do talk about in the book.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that. And no, we don't really talk a lot about plant medicine here on the show. And I'd be curious to hear, what do you girls think? What do you ladies think about even having that discussion? I have had family members and friends and colleagues who have ventured into them, there's not clearing traumas, not just stuck in those neuro patterns and not finding a way out, and really at their wits end, people with addictions, and trying plant medicine and it finally being kind of a piece of the puzzle that unlocks a lot of what's going on. And I realize that for all kinds of reasons, it may not be a good decision for people, and they may not even have the resource for it. I remember I had a really good friend of mine who has really severe anxiety, and she knows she's got a lot of brain trauma. She went to Dr. Amen's clinic. And so he told her, he's like, what's happening with you is that you have too much trauma. You've got to go and work that out. And so she's been trying all these modalities and reached out to me. And she's like, do you know anybody where you live? I know you're connected with a lot of holistic practitioners, because she's like, where I live, it's a no-go. There's nothing. I can't do it here. There's nothing I can do. And she's like, but I'm desperate. I just feel like I need I need to be willing to exhaust all of my options. I haven't reached back out to her yet. It's a call I need to make, actually. That's a great reminder right now. But I do realize that a lot of people, that's a no-go. And that what I will say, Doni, is that I know a lot of what's going to be in your book, and I know that it's going to be more fine-tuned and tailored to the specific five particular archetypes of stress. But in my experience, and probably in your experience as well, is that I can get almost all the way there. Then there are definitely times in my life where I have been like, oh my goodness, it's like a beach vacation in my brain. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Love it.
So I know it's achievable, but it's so fascinating. And I know the neuroscience around it is that these grooves, these protective grooves, are there for a reason. The brain, it's always looking for a reason to be protective. I talk a lot about in the show and in my own books about sending the brain preemptive safety signals.
Yes.
Like just pre-gaming the brain, before maybe something, is coming up, and the right nootropics and supplements and nutrition. And really, I think for me is really a lot of me time, a lot of time to myself, where I'm not caught up in everybody's business. I'm not the common denominator for everybody and their mama's stuff. You know what I'm saying? And so I know that it is achievable without plant medicine, but it's been so fascinating to me, girl, how quick it is to come right back into play. You know what I'm saying? And so I feel like for me, that's why I talk about it so much, is it's my biggest struggle. It is always up for review. Always. It's always up for review.
The thing is, yes, like and this is why in the book I cover the whole menu of possibilities. And I really do believe that it's what we're doing on the day-to-day. I call it our self-care, right? We hear more about self-care, but what I do is I break down the acronym CARE. So C is clean eating. It's what we're feeding ourselves, and not only what we're feeding ourselves, but how we're feeding ourselves. Like what intervals of time and how much food and which types of foods and how long are we fasting and all of that. So if you fast too long, now you're stressing yourself out again. Same with exercise. Right. Exercise is a huge stress relief, but if we over exercise, it's triggering our cortisol again. And so it's, to me, it's like finding the Goldilocks, right? We have to, for ourselves, for each of us, find what is enough, but not too much. Because if we don't do enough of our care, then that's not going to work. We're going to fall behind. We're going to get burned out. But if we do too much, which, like we talked about, it's so tempting because we've been taught from a young age to be willing to do more. So we do more exercise, we do more fasting, we do more, even meditation. Now, I have to say, because again, you can see I'm a researcher on myself, so I'm willing to try plant medicine. Not everybody needs to do that. But what I love to do is bring back the information I gained and say, I learned from that experience with plant medicine that it's possible to heal, that a lot of it is, like you're saying, by taking a break. Like we literally, sometimes I think we just need more time to ourselves. Like, how do we create 10 minutes, let alone 4 hours or a whole day or a whole week where we just like get a break from our lives, right? And as a mom and someone who's working and needing to work all the time, that's hard to imagine. So sometimes we do have to imagine. We have to start with small increments. Like, how do we start with 10 minutes and just be like, I get 10 minutes where nobody else is going to ask anything of me. I can do whatever the heck I want. If that's going to be some breaths, if that's going to be meditation, if that's going to be take the dog for a walk, whatever it is. But now you get to be the owner of your own brain for 10 minutes. It's amazing what can happen. And that's to say, I take that after everything I've experienced. I come back and I realize, wow, I can actually have some of those same moments of realization that I have had with plant medicine in a moment at home, but we have to make sure we create that time for ourselves. And that's sometimes the biggest struggle is for men and for women is, how do we ask for that? How do we ask for time for ourselves? How do we ask for that help and that, you know what I mean? That because we have to prioritize ourselves enough to be willing to say, hey, I need 10 minutes to myself right now.
Girl, amen. I have been trying to prioritize alone time for months, and every week, I'm like, I'm going to have alone time. I'm going to have alone time. And then the week happens to me, versus happening for me. And I'm like, oh, I could just get this work done real quick, or I could just do this thing real quick, or let me just go see what's up with Kingston. And then Kingston brings me into the world, and so I was on the phone with a coach the other day, and she's like, you have to be so fierce about this time to yourself. She's like, pretend like it's $1 million patient.
Yes.
Like she's like, what does it have to be for you to actually walk out of the door and go be by yourself? Like, and I was like, oh my God, that's how I have to reframe it. Like, it's gotta be so critical. There's no one who can stop me, including myself. I cannot even stop myself from going and doing it. But like, even this week, it's now, today's Thursday afternoon. And my intention after this, although I'm writing an episode on 10 ways to lower high cortisol.
Yes. Now you know what you're going to write about. And here, sometimes, like, it's so funny as you're saying this, part of me thinks like especially when my daughter was young, because I get it. When you have a young child, you feel like you need every free minute you're supposed to be with them. So we kind of feel guilty for taking even a minute to ourselves. But I would think, even if I get to go in the bathroom and take a shower for 10 minutes by myself, I would be like celebrating. And the shower becomes where I'm meditating, where I'm singing, where I'm downloading. Like sometimes it's as simple as taking a shower. So start with something you maybe already do, but you maybe weren't thinking of it that way. Maybe you weren't giving yourself permission to take the shower time as your time. And the other thing is, for me, what it took, by the way, I mean, I had migraines for over 20 years. And what would happen with the migraine is the pain would come on from my shoulders and my neck, and I would get so nauseous. I would be vomiting sometimes for 24 hours. So I'm maybe on the bathroom floor And now I can't take care of my daughter. I can't take care of my patients. I can't do anything except for lay on the floor and wait for this to go away. And I said to myself, what do I have to do? What do I have to do to not have this happening? And I realized one day that the migraines were trying to tell me to take a break, that if I would create my own breaks in my schedule, I wouldn't have to have the migraine create the break for me. So I had to realize that the pain I was in and the suffering, that's what made me make a break for myself. And so I ended up started scheduling it into my day. I literally, yes, put it into my calendar. This is, I would start with an hour or 4 hours. And I'd be like, this is my time that I get to do whatever I want. I don't have anything else I'm supposed to be. Everybody else knows that this is my time. And I just start with something doable. Like always, like any changes we make, I always encourage you to start in small increments, because if we try to if we're like, oh, I'm going to take 10 days off, it's never going to happen. You're going to fail every time. So you have to choose something that actually you're going to be successful at, right? So then you can be successful and celebrate it. And then you can choose it again and you can extend it a little bit until you find a perfect amount. But that's what it took for me to make that choice. Mariza, it was like finally saying enough with these migraines, and I don't get migraines anymore.
Oh, thank goodness. I also had the stress, overwhelm migraines too. And it took me a long time to finally figure it out as well, because you throw everything at it and you're just like, oh, my body's like, I just can't do this anymore. The other thing I wanted to share really quickly is that fine tuning piece. You're right. Yes. As a recovering stressaholic, well, clearly maybe not. As somebody who's, for the most part, like I recognize very quickly where I'm like, oh, that I'm out of alignment here. And I know when I've overstressed the system, but like for me, I can't work out more than 30 minutes. It's got to be in the morning. It can't be in the afternoon. Like I know what my cortisol looks like, throughout the day. I know when it's closest to my being my best friend and when it's not, you know what I'm saying? And so I've learned all these things about my body and how to operate in the world so that I can minimize the amount of burnout, that feeling. And one of the things that I wanted to just share that's kind of been a little bit of a game change, because sometimes, girl, I will override what I know to be true. And so I have a wearable that I've been wearing. It's called a Whoop strap. My husband finally got it for me. And I was so reluctant because it measures your sleep, and we are co-sleeping. I'm still breastfeeding, girl. Let me tell you, it is a hot mess of a situation. And I was like, I don't need a strap to tell me how crappy my sleep is every day. But he finally got it for me for Christmas, and I've been wearing it. And one of the things that I love about it is it gives me a battery score every single morning based on my sleep, my HRV, my respiratory rate, my heart rate, my pulse. Takes all this information into consideration. Doesn't look at like hormone levels by any means, but
I can't wait how they can do that. That would be awesome.
So cool. And it'll tell me like your recovery score is 34%. And that'll tell me I am not doing a 45-minute Peloton ride, or I'm not doing a big weight training that day. Like when I'm under 30% recovery, which is basically in the crapper. Okay. And it feels like that to me. Like I wake up and I'm like, man, I don't feel like I have anything in the tank. I know, like, it's a great validation to tell me like, no, girl, you ain't got nothing in the tank. Like it's not the day to push yourself. And then when days I'm in the 85 range or 80% range, I can feel it too. Like it really attributes to how I feel, and I know I can push it more now. So that's been kind of like my own little way of hacking of like, oh, there's a visual that really is a representation of how crappy or how good I feel based on how hard I pushed myself as a mama yesterday. You know what I'm saying?
And I think what I'm guessing is that you've already really fine-tuned based on your stress type. Like, I'm curious when you look in the book and you see, like, I think you're an example of someone who's already figured out how to fine tune your stress type, which is exactly what I want to encourage everyone to do. And yes, we can use these devices to help us get some objective feedback.
Once we know, right?
Because then it can help you fine tune. And I also, besides using a device, I encourage you to look at those 5 things. Look, when you wake up in the morning, do this little daily check-in. How's my energy? How's my mood? How was my sleep? How was my focus? How do I feel in my body? And when you do that little daily check-in, you're going to get a sense of what you're describing as your how am I doing with my stress recovery today? And then how am I going to shift my daily self-care routine based on that, right? On your day when you come near 35, you know that you need more self-care recovery that day. Then on a day when you're at 85, you're like, okay, I'm going to do my general step self-care, right? So we can constantly be adapting. And I think it's important because it shows us we need to be aware of our stress recovery day in and day out, not just when you're on vacation, not just, you know what I mean? We tend to delay it, and it's not, it has to be every day.
It has to be every day. That is the one thing I know for 100% sure. And I'm so happy that it's in the book and you're saying it. It has to be every day, because let me tell you, when it's not every day for me, it shows, it comes all right back up. And yes, you're right. I mean, I've been fine tuning this for years, and still it's a struggle, and still I fall into patterns. And so I wanted to just put that on the table, because I know you and I have been through it, and I know that this is your wheelhouse 100%. And I know so often my community comes to me, the amazing women listening to the show, and it's just like, man, like I thought I turned a corner and now I'm back where I was, and I'm like, I know that place all too well. And so what I'm really hoping that people get from this book is not only identifying kind of where they land, but then also how to fine tune, how to get to a place that feels good to them. And that's what I really hope. And I just want to say thank you I know you're a researcher first and foremost, and I know you've been through the gamut as well. Like, there's something to be said about someone who's lived it and been in it, and, and it's still on the journey. And so Doni, honey, I think that this is such a magnificent book to put into the world. The second I knew you had a book coming out, I was like, girl, you got to get on the show, because I know this has been your life's work. And so talk to me about how we can get this book into our hands.
Well, it's through this publishing company, so you can get it wherever books are sold, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the places. And then definitely come back to let me know that you got it at drdoni.com, so that I can give, I want to help people use the book and really get the most out of it.
I love it. Because do you have some bonuses on the book order page, honey?
Absolutely. Yes. So if you go at drdoni.com, or if you go /MSRH for Master Stress Reset Health, you're going to get, well, first of all, if you pre-order it the first week of May, we're going to be doing a live event all week for everyone who's receiving the book and starting to use it. It's my live stress reset. And then we also have, I have the recipes from the book, because it also has the clean eating recipes. You get access to those right away. You're going to get a meditation from me, and so much more, just to really support you through, using this information. I love it. I completely agree. Like, I really want everyone to be able to know that you can dial it in. And it's a daily practice. I think of it. It's something we just need to be aware of and practice daily. I do. And I have hard days too. And then I just learn from them and say, what do I need to tweak about my routine and what I'm doing, so that I can dial it in as best as possible to feel as best as I can and still do what I'm passionate about.
I love it. I love it. And this is going out. This interview will go out the week that the book goes out. And so awesome. It'll be a great time to go and take advantage of all the bonuses you've got going on. And I am so excited to get my hands on it and to read it myself. I know that I'm going to resonate with so much in this book, but I hope I hope to walk away with some other tools that are in your wheelhouse that I may not even know about. So thank you, honey.
You're welcome. And please reach out. I'd love to help you out more. So just let me know.
Thanks, honey.